Welcome to The Pod, a podcast for women in healthcare leadership, a heartfelt space where women executives in healthcare and their allies unite to support and uplift each other with personal stories that inspire positive change, nurture optimistic mindsets, and celebrate diverse perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Woods. When you care for the caregiver, you transform the entire system. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation that will challenge how you think about patient care and leadership presence. My guest today is Darlene Cunha, a transformative healthcare leader whose journey from bedside nurse to executive coach embodies the evolution of healthcare leadership itself. As a certified executive in nursing practice and Caritas coach, Darlene has spent decades driving systemic change through what she calls healing-centered engagement and systems of love. Darlene's leadership philosophy is beautifully simple yet profound. True leadership isn't about control, it's about presence, purpose, and people. She's guided healthcare organizations through mergers, crisis recovery, and cultural transformation, always anchored in one fundamental truth that when we honor the humanity in healthcare, we don't just improve outcomes, we transform lives. With extensive experience across academic centers, faith-based organizations, and investor-owned systems, Darlene brings a unique perspective on how compassionate care and operational excellence aren't opposing forces, but rather partners in creating the future of healthcare. Today, we're going to hear about a patient named Gus, who changed the trajectory of Darlene's career, and we'll explore how leaders can move their teams from transactional care to what she calls Caritas-informed practice, an approach that puts love and human connection at the heart of every healthcare interaction. So whether you're a frontline nurse, physician, a department manager, or a C-suite executive, this conversation will remind you why you entered healthcare in the first place and give you practical tools to lead with both your head and your heart. Let's dive in. Welcome to the pod, Darlene.
Oh, Kristen, thank you so much for that incredibly kind introduction. I am really genuinely grateful to be here. You have created such a thoughtful and welcoming space for this podcast, and it's a reflection truly of who you are, not just as a leader, but as a deeply compassionate human being. It's truly an honor to be part of this conversation with you today.
Well, we are truly honored to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time. And Darlene, I would love if you could describe yourself as, I've heard you describe yourself as someone who leads with presence, not just credentials. So could you paint us a picture of what that looks like in your daily work as a healthcare executive?
Absolutely. For me, leading with presence means I don't just show up with a title. I show up with my full attention. It's about being truly with people, not just around them. That might look like pausing in a busy hallway to really listen to a team member or asking a question in a meeting that sort of invites vulnerability, not just updates, right? One example that sticks with me is we used to label patients as non-compliant. But when we slowed down and asked why, we found heartbreaking truths like they couldn't afford their medications or they didn't have a ride to the clinic. Presence means listening without judgment. And when we do that, we start to see the whole person, not just the problem. That's where trust begins. That's where healing truly starts.
Oh, I love that, especially the phrase listening without judgment. And if I could build on it, because what I heard you say too is listening with curiosity. And so then we get curious about why would a patient be, as you said, non-compliant? I think that's just a powerful statement. You mentioned that when you care for the caregiver, you transform the entire system. That's another powerful statement. And what brought you to that realization?
Well, Kristen, it really came from watching burnout up close. Seeing incredible nurses and clinicians give everything they had and still feel like it wasn't enough. I realized that if we only focus on outcomes and overlook the people delivering the care, we're missing the foundation. When caregivers feel seen and supported, not just as professionals, but as people, everything shifts, everything changes. They show up differently, they connect more deeply, and patients feel that. It's not about adding more wellness programs. It's about creating cultures where kindness is modeled, where people feel safe to say, I'm not okay today. And that's how we build resilience, not by pushing through, but by caring through.
And whose job is it to see and hear those caregivers? Who's responsible for that?
We all are as leaders, right? And we all are as each other's colleagues. When we hear a friend, a colleague suffering, we need to model that behavior of compassion and empathy and care. We need to be present. We need to hold them in silence. We're not always there to fix. Sometimes we're just there to be present. So when we model that behavior as leaders, it transcends to all of the frontline staff as well. We have to be the ones who show it, who embody it, who live it.
Sometimes I hear people say, I'm just too busy. I don't have time to pause and have a conversation. We've got work to do. How do you address that when people say, I don't have time for compassion, I just have to get the job done?
Yeah, well, I can imagine, and I've heard that before, where people say, I don't have time. And I tell them, compassion doesn't take time. It's your presence. It's how you show up. It's how you bring your whole self to that moment. And in that moment, you give more, not only to the patient, but to yourself as a caregiver. In that 5 seconds it takes to say, good morning, how are you? And truly listen, that's a compassionate moment. Doesn't take extra time. It's different than entering a room and not acknowledging that space, not saying good morning, just getting right to the task at hand. That's where it feels mechanical, and patients feel it as cold. They don't feel it as a welcoming, warm, and compassionate moment of care.
Yes. And if I can build on that, it reminds me of when we were taught interviewing skills as physicians, that takes, I think it was 7 to 8 seconds before a physician interrupts a patient's story of what brought them in. Yet, if we can pause and be present and listen for 90 seconds, a lot of times the story unveils itself, and we don't even have to ask as many directing questions. I love that description of presence because it brings me back to those times of listening to patients.
We spend so much time trying to respond, and we're listening to respond rather listening to learn. And if we just pause for those few seconds, and trust me, I had to learn it too. I was a trauma nurse for 20 years, and I can tell you, I just wanted to get things done. But when I paused, when I really paused, those connections, they build something within you as a caregiver that you don't find in textbooks. So I tell my colleagues, I tell my staff, pause, learn the power of a pause. You'll be a much better caregiver for it.
Well, and you said something important. It takes intentionality and practice to learn that new skill. And this might be a great point for us to hear your story about Gus. I know when you first told it to me, it was powerful and really moved me. So I want to take the listeners back to that pivotal moment in your nursing career. Why don't you tell us about Gus? Who was he and what was happening at that time?
Oh, you have that one patient that just leaves that imprint on your heart that you will never forget. And I was a brand new nurse, probably out of nursing school, 3 months, going to change the world. And I was assigned to this patient. And Gus was the patient no one wanted. He was gruff, he was angry, and honestly, a little scary. He had just had lung surgery and was in a lot of pain, physically and emotionally. And I knew his prognosis was poor. He wanted his room dark, the blinds were drawn, and he barely spoke to anyone. And when he did, it was gruff. It was scary. But when I walked in, I didn't just see a difficult patient. I saw someone who was deeply alone and afraid. And he didn't need me to fix him. He needed me to see him. And that changed everything.
Oh, wow. What was it about your interaction with Gus that made you realize that you needed to change how you approached care?
Yeah. So as I said, he was a little scary. And at first I was intimidated by his anger and silence. I wanted to get in, do the dressing change, his vital signs, and go about my day. But something told me to slow down. I realized his anger wasn't about me. It was about fear. It was about grief and probably a lifetime of pain somewhere along the line. So I stayed. I sat in the silence. I asked questions. And even when he didn't answer, I slowed down. And when I slowed down, he started to open up, much like you were just talking. Sometimes when we pause, when we listen, the story unfolds, right? I learned he was estranged from his only sister and his family. And even though he never said it outright, I could tell he missed her. And that experience taught me that care isn't just clinical, it's relational. It's really about meeting people where they are, even if that place is messy or hard.
What was the impact of your transition into this relationship-based care on the rest of the care team and the rest of the nurses on that floor?
What Gus taught me is that presence is the most powerful tool we have. It wasn't the wound care that made the biggest difference. It was the moments I sat with him, the moments we shared a story, or just that space without judgment. It was those small acts of kindness that said, "You're not alone." Patients don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need us to stay and to witness their pain without trying to fix it. That's what Gus needed. And in the end, I was able to help him reconnect with his sister before he passed. There wasn't a dry eye on the unit, with all of my colleagues that day. That moment reminded us all that healing isn't always about curing. Sometimes it's about reconnection, dignity, love, and the staff, it completely reframed how we did our care because we saw that it wasn't just about skill, it was about soul. It's about unconditional love and presence. And we need healthcare systems that honor those micro moments of caring, right? And that's what we learned as a team. I saw my colleagues shift in the way they showed up to patients after that. That same team that had avoided his room began to lean in. They saw what was possible when we lead with compassion. That's priceless. That's just priceless. That's the kind of culture I want to build, where we don't just treat illness, we honor humanity.
You said a phrase that really caught my attention, and it was the micro moments of compassion. Again, I think that we tell ourselves fibs when we say we're too busy, I don't have time, we're short on staff, I'm overwhelmed. But I think if we ground ourselves in that phrase just micro moments. And the presence that we do show up with matters. And that's free. That doesn't take extra time. So I'd love if you could talk to us about Caritas-informed practice, because you are a champion of this. So some of our listeners might not be familiar with that term. Can you explain what Caritas means in healthcare?
Yeah, Caritas is just leading with love. It's leading with compassion. It's not transactional, it's transformational. That's what Caritas is. There's a difference between checking the boxes and checking the boxes while holding someone's hand, while listening to their story. Transactional care, it's focused on tasks, speed, getting through the day, right? Your efficiencies. And it can feel robotic and draining. For patients, it often feels, cold and impersonal, like they're another chart that you're trying to complete, right? But when we talk about compassionate care, Caritas care, it's a whole different experience. It's about slowing down enough to really see the person in front of you. Caregivers feel more connected and fulfilled, and patients feel heard. They feel respected and valued. It's the difference between completing a task and completing a moment of healing. You can still check the vital signs while you're holding their hand. You can still look at the IV pump while you rub their shoulder. Just that moment of human touch. We're designed for that. We're designed for compassion and human touch. And so when we eliminate that, when we just focus on tasks and we don't focus on the heart of the work, this beautiful art of human caring, we lose our own humanity in the work that we do. So Caritas it's not mutually exclusive from the work that we do. It's not an add-on or a sprinkle or a program. It's a set of behaviors of how you want to show up, how you want to be treated. That's Caritas.
I love that. You work with teams to move from burnout to belonging. Can you share a specific example of how implementing Caritas practices transformed a team or a department that you've worked with?
I have so many, but I'll find one. There was a department I worked with that was really struggling. High turnover, low morale, and sort of this sense of disconnection to their work. And we started small. Daily check-ins, just a few minutes for staff to kind of share how they were doing. Then leadership joined in, right? Because you have to be vulnerable too. You have to be able to share what you're struggling with. Nobody's perfect. We show up together as human beings, right? And when we model our own vulnerability and presence, our staff start to see us differently. They start to see us as human and relatable. And so over time, what I saw was something shifted. People started to feel seen. They started supporting each other more. Patient satisfaction went up. Turnover went down. The culture moved from one of isolation to connection. It was a beautiful reminder for me that healing doesn't just happen at the bedside. It happens in the break room. It happens in the huddle. It happens in the way we show up for each other. So if we make those intentional micro moments of healing for one another as well, we start to shift. Somebody once said to me, how do you know when you're in an organization that really is one of care, one like a true loving organization? And I said 3 words. You feel it. You feel it when you walk in. People greet you. They say hello. They escort you to where you're going. They're genuinely interested when you say, how are you? They really stop to listen. That's the culture we want to create. So when you're trying to sort of discern where there's opportunity in a department that may be struggling, listen, show up. Go to where the work is being done. Watch the team. hear their struggles, and be vulnerable. Sit, you're not there to fix. You're there to listen and help them see where there's opportunity to grow. And so when you start to do that and you invite them into the discussion and you invite them into the solutions, there's a shift. They want to be part of that vision, that mission that brought them into this beautiful art of human caring to begin with. So that's how I start. And that's how I changed that department that had struggled for many years with high turnover. It was just listening.
So, one of the things that comes to mind for me is it can be really uncomfortable to sit and listen. As caregivers, we want to fix things, and you've mentioned this, but I wondered if you could share a couple tools, phrases, or body language that you use to show you're listening and you're being empathetic, but you're not trying to fix. So, how do we become less uncomfortable with that?
Yeah, you got to start small. You have to start building some rituals, right? So maybe every morning, I worked in an organization where every morning they did a meditation, and it was only a minute meditation in the morning to ground the staff for that day. And they gave a little blessing to each other. That morning ritual was never interrupted. So find a way to build a ritual into your team that honors their work and it acknowledges their challenges, right? Today's going to be a hard day. We have a lot of patients in the emergency room that need to come up. We're going to work as a team. Just start small, be intentional, listen, but really listen. Because sometimes what's said is just the icing. We need to get below that. Be visible. You can't show up once in a while. You have to be present. You have to be visible. Your team needs to know that you're there to help and support them and create that space. Like I said, even if it's for a minute or two, we're not asking to add enormous amounts of time into a day that's already busy, right? But we have to celebrate those human moments. We have to celebrate the caregiver that really was supportive to a family member, and call it out. We do a great job in recognizing where we have opportunity. We need to do a better job in recognizing where we had wins, right? Celebrate those wins. Celebrate those moments of compassion. I called out to a nurse on a unit and he said, "Do you realize you were the healing environment to that family? Do you realize you gave them hope?" She started crying, literally started crying in the hallway. And she said to me, "No one's ever told me I'm the healing environment. No one's ever told me I gave them hope." Shame on us as leaders. Shame on us for not calling those micro moments of love and care out that fuel us, that give us that energy to get back up when it gets hard, right? Because healthcare is messy. And we need to be able to show up, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, and model the behavior. Because I'll tell you, compassion's contagious, but it's got to start at the top. We have to show it and model it.
That's so beautifully said. And the time with you always goes way too quickly. If someone listening today feels called to explore Caritas coaching or bring more compassionate care to their organization, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know it's a journey, that it's a deeply rewarding one. Caritas coaching isn't adding more to your plate, right? It's not about that. It's about transforming how you show up. It helps leaders cultivate presence, resilience, relational leadership, even in the most complex environments. It takes courage and patience, but the impact is profound. When we lead with love and humanity, we don't just change systems, we change lives. And it all starts with one intentional step towards connection.
I love that. I want to thank you, Darlene, for being on the show today. This conversation is just the tip of the iceberg. Really, there's so much to it, but I love that you were able to share your experience and your story about Gus to understand that healthcare need not be transactional, that they can be compassionate moments. I'm really going to lean into that micro moments of compassion. That phrase resonated with me. And to our listeners, I want to challenge you to think about your own Gus moment and ask yourself, how can you create space for more humanity in your leadership today? Again, thank you, Darlene, for reminding us that in healthcare, love isn't just a feeling, it's a strategy, and it's the most powerful force for transformation that we have.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for this wonderful opportunity to share the power of Caritas with you and your listeners.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the pod. I invite you to join our pod every month as we empower one another, fostering a world where women in healthcare leadership thrive.